A storm rolled over the Great Plains, dragging a curtain of darkness across the sky. The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing at the canvas of the Carter family's covered wagon as it lurched along the muddy trail. Rain slashed sideways, pelting Ellie Carter's face as she fought to hold the reins of the panicked horse. The beast reared, eyes wild, hooves thrashing against the storm-drenched earth. "Hold on!" her father shouted from inside the wagon, but his voice was lost beneath a deafening crack of thunder. A wheel struck a hidden rock, and the world turned into chaos. The wagon groaned, tipped, and collapsed onto its side. A scream tore from her mother's throat as it splintered and the heavy trunk inside was flung forward. Ellie hit the ground hard. Pain flared through her ribs as she rolled down a shallow embankment, her hands clawing at the mud for purchase. She came to a stop, coughing against the taste of earth and rain. The storm howled above her, its fury undiminished, but she barely noticed. "Ma! Pa!" Her voice barely carried through the storm, but she scrambled to her feet, slipping and sliding as she fought her way back to the wreckage. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel still spinning uselessly. She saw her mother first, half buried beneath the collapsed frame, her eyes unseeing, blood trickling from a gash at her temple. Ellie froze. "Pa!" Her voice cracked. A groan. A single, pained sound. She lunged forward, shoving aside a broken plank, and found her father pinned beneath the weight of their overturned supplies. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, dark against his rain-soaked shirt. His breath came in ragged gasps. "Ellie?" His fingers twitched, reaching for her. She grasped his hand, her own trembling. "Hold on. I can get you out." "Too late," he rasped. His grip tightened, then weakened. "You have to run. This land ain't safe." Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the rain on her face. "No, I can." His fingers went slack. His chest stilled. A hollow sound tore from her throat, something between a sob and a scream. She collapsed against him, her grief swallowed by the relentless storm. For a long time, she remained there, kneeling in the mud, her father's cooling hand still wrapped in hers. The wind howled its cruel indifference. The rain fell, washing away the blood, but it could not erase what had happened. She was alone now, alone in a land that did not forgive weakness. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the wreckage, unseen eyes watched. Taka remained still, a ghost within the tall grass, the storm masking his presence. He had seen death before. War had taken many of his people, had torn apart his home with fire and steel. He felt no pity for the settlers, only a quiet understanding of what it meant to lose. And yet he did not look away. The girl knelt in the mud, her slender frame racked with sobs, her hands clutched against her chest as if she could hold her world together through sheer will. She was weak, fragile, a flower in a killing frost. She would not last a night. Taka shifted slightly, the leather of his bow creaking against his shoulder. He had followed the wagon's trail earlier, half expecting to find another hunting party, men who sought to claim his land as their own. But this was different. The girl was not a threat. She was something else, a burden. The wind shifted, carrying a scent beneath the rain, something other than wet earth and storm. Taka stiffened, his keen senses catching a faint trace of smoke, not from the wreckage, something farther off. He turned his gaze westward, beyond the girl, beyond the wagon, and saw flickering lights in the distance. Small, uncertain, but he knew the truth. Campfires, not Cheyenne. His grip on his bow tightened. Ellie lifted her head, her breath hitching. A sound, footsteps in the mud, heavy and careless. Not her father's, not the storm. She swallowed against a knot in her throat, forcing herself to listen. Men's voices, low, rough. Fear coiled around her ribs. Through the sheets of rain, she caught glimpses of figures moving through the darkness. There were at least 3 of them, their outlines shifting like shadows against the storm's fury. Strangers, bandits, perhaps, or worse. Her father's last words rang in her ears. "You have to run." She did not move. One of the figures stopped. "Wagon's fresh wreckage," a man muttered, "could be salvageable." Another chuckled. Or it could be a trap. A third voice, sharper. Ain't no trap. Someone's still here. Ellie's heart pounded against her ribs. She tried to breathe silently, to press herself into the ground as if she could disappear. The first man took a step closer. Lightning flared, illuminating a bearded face, a rifle slung across his back. His eyes scanned the wreckage. Then they landed on her. "Well, now," he murmured, "what do we have here?" She bolted. Her feet pounded against the wet earth as she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm fought her, rain blinding, wind clawing at her soaked dress. "Get her!" Shouts rang out. Boots splashed through the mud. She didn't look back. A flash of movement. Something dark cutting through the night. Then a scream. A choked, gurgling sound. Ellie stumbled, confusion mixing with terror. She risked a glance over her shoulder. One of the men stood rigid, his hands grasping at something buried in his throat. An arrow. He collapsed without a sound. The others froze. Another arrow whistled through the rain. The second man dropped. The third bandit spun wildly, fumbling for his rifle, but a shadow moved behind him. A shape. A man. A flash of steel. The third bandit slumped forward, a knife buried deep between his ribs. Ellie's breath hitched. She watched as the shadow straightened, rain glistening off his bronze skin. His dark eyes locked on hers. For the first time, she saw him clearly. The Cheyenne warrior stood tall and unmoving, his bow at his side, his gaze unreadable. The storm framed him like an apparition conjured from the wild itself. Ellie's pulse thundered in her ears. He had saved her. But why? The morning came in silence. The storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean, but the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and death. Smoke still curled from the broken remains of the wagon. Its charred would blacken against the golden prairie. Ellie sat in the mud, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the bodies of the men who had tried to kill her. Their lifeless forms were half buried in the wet grass, the rain having washed away the blood. The sight made her stomach turn. She had never seen a man die before, but she had never been truly alone before, either. Her gaze flicked upward. He was still there. The warrior. He stood a few paces away, silent, watching. His dark eyes held no kindness, no cruelty, just patience, as if waiting to see what she would do next. He had not spoken a word since saving her, had not offered comfort or explanation. He had simply remained, an unmoving presence in the waking dawn. Ellie swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to run, to flee into the wild and put as much distance between herself and the stranger as possible. But where would she go? Her home was gone. Her family was gone. The land stretched in every direction, vast and indifferent. She knew nothing of survival, how to find food, how to start a fire, how to keep the wild from swallowing her whole. And he was still watching. She forced herself to her feet, wobbling slightly. The world felt unsteady beneath her. "Why did you save me?" Her voice came out hoarse, raw from grief and the night's cold. The warrior did not answer. Her fingers clenched into fists. "You killed those men. You didn't have to, but you did." Still, nothing. Frustration burned in her chest. But so did something else, fear. She took a cautious step backward, then another. He made no move to stop her. She turned and walked away, her boots sinking into the wet earth, forcing herself to breathe, to think. She needed a plan, needed to find shelter before nightfall. But her body had other ideas. The exhaustion hit her like a blow. Her limbs trembled with the weight of too much grief, too little food. The world tilted, her vision dimming at the edges. She barely felt herself fall. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a warrior, still watching. She woke to the smell of smoke and roasting meat, blinking against the midday light. Ellie found herself lying near a fire. The warmth seeped into her aching limbs, chasing away the lingering chill of the night. She stirred, wincing as her muscles protested. A few feet away, the warrior crouched beside the flames, turning a rabbit on a spit. The scent made her stomach clench painfully. She sat up slowly, half expecting him to react, but he did not acknowledge her. "You carried me," she said after a long silence. No response. Ellie swallowed. eyes darting toward the trees, the open plains beyond. She could run now, but where? The thought sent a wave of helplessness through her. The warrior tore a piece of rabbit free and placed it on a flat stone. Then, without a word, he nudged it toward her. Ellie hesitated. Was this a trick? A test? Her hunger won out. She reached forward and took the offering, fingers trembling as she brought it to her lips. The first bite was scalding hot, the juices rich with smoke, but she barely chewed before swallowing. She had never tasted anything so good. The warrior watched her, unmoving. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Do you have a name?" A flicker of something passed across his face, there and gone too quickly to place. "Taka," he said, his voice quiet, firm. Ellie exhaled. A name. It made him real, no longer just a shadow in the wild. "Taka," she repeated, testing the shape of it. He said nothing more. She looked down at the half-eaten rabbit in her hands, at the fire that was not hers but had been given freely. He had saved her life twice now, and yet she still had no idea why. She wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, barely more than a whisper. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I don't know where to go." Taka's gaze did not waver. She expected him to tell her to leave, to say she was not his concern. But instead, he reached to his side, pulled a small, sharp flint from a leather pouch, and held it out to her. Ellie stared. "What?" He gestured toward the fire, toward the unburned beside it. A lesson, understanding dawned slowly. He was not offering her kindness. He was offering her a choice, learn or die. She hesitated, then took the flint from his outstretched hand. It was smooth, cool against her fingertips. Taka pulled a second piece from his pouch and struck it against the edge of his knife. A bright spark flickered, then disappeared. He repeated the motion, slow and deliberate. Spark, spark. Ellie mimicked him. Flint against steel. The first strike did nothing. The second, nothing. But the third, a tiny ember caught in the dry grass. She inhaled sharply. Taka nodded just once. For the first time since the night before, Ellie felt something other than fear. It was small, fragile, but it was there. She wasn't useless. She wasn't nothing. She turned the flint in her hands, glancing at Taka. He did not smile, did not speak, but something in the way he watched her had changed. For now, that was enough. The night was restless. A wind whispered to the tall grass, bending it in ghostly waves beneath the silver glow of the moon. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced against the rough bark of the trees. Ellie sat across from Taka, her fingers tight around the flint he had given her, as if holding it tethered her to something real. She had begun to learn. In the days since the storm, Taka had shown her how to read the land, how to find water where none seemed to exist, how to move without making a sound. He did not speak much, but his lessons were clear. Every movement had purpose. Every gesture held meaning. But trust was still a fragile thing. Ellie sensed it in the way Taka watched her, as if weighing something unseen. He was not keeping her as a prisoner, nor was he guiding her toward any settlement. He was simply waiting, though for what, she did not know. Tonight, she would find out. The first sign of danger came on the wind. Taka stiffened, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something just beyond the reach of ordinary ears. Ellie held her breath, straining to hear. Then, hooves, distant but closing in fast. Taka moved in an instant, dousing the fire with a swift sweep of earth. The night swallowed them in darkness. Ellie's pulse thundered as she scrambled to her feet, heart pounding against her ribs. "Go," Taka murmured. It was the first word he had spoken in hours. She did not argue. They slipped into the trees, moving as shadows among the underbrush. Taka led, silent and sure, weaving through the landscape like a creature born to the night. Ellie followed, her breath coming in sharp bursts, trying to mimic his quiet grace but failing. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then came the voices. Ellie clenched her jaw, pressing herself against the rough bark of an oak. She could see them now. 4 riders cutting through the grass, their torches sputtering in the wind. They were not bandits this time, nor desperate wanderers. They were soldiers. Their uniforms were rough and dust-stained, but unmistakable. U.S. Cavalry. Ellie knew enough of the world to recognize the blue coats, the stiff hats, the rifles slung across their backs. "Tracks end here," one of them muttered, pulling his horse to a stop. He swung down, boots crunching in the dry grass as he scanned the darkness. Another rider snorted. "If there's a girl, she'll come running soon enough. Ain't no place for her to hide forever." Ellie's breath hitched. They were looking for her. Taka turned his head slightly, just enough for her to catch the warning in his eyes. Stay still. Stay silent. But the soldiers weren't leaving. "We got orders," the first man said, pulling a flask from his belt and taking a slow drink. "Settlers keep going missing. More than just this girl's family. Damn Cheyenne been pushing back hard." Ellie's stomach twisted. Taka did not move. His face was unreadable, but the air around him felt different now, coiled, waiting. "You think she's still alive?" another voice asked. The first soldier grinned. "I don't care. Either she's lost or the savages have her. Either way, she's as good as dead." Ellie's hands trembled. The man took another drink, then spat into the dirt. "If we find her, she'll tell us where they're hiding. The ones that took her." The words felt like a slap. She turned her gaze toward Taka, expecting anger, some sign of offense, but he remained utterly still. Only his fingers flexed slightly at his side, the faintest movement, but she saw the tension in them. Then, without a sound, he moved. Before she could react, he was gone, slipping through the trees like smoke. She had no choice but to follow. They ran deeper into the woods, the soldiers' voices fading behind them. The night stretched wide and endless around them, but Ellie knew better than to think they were safe. When they finally stopped, she was shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "They were looking for me." Her voice barely carried in the wind. Taka did not respond. Ellie turned to him, frustration rising. "Why didn't you kill them?" The words shocked her as soon as she spoke them. Taka's expression did not change, but his gaze was sharp, measuring. "Killing is easy," he said at last, "but it changes nothing." Ellie's fist clenched. "They would have killed me." He nodded. "Yes." The simplicity of his answer sent a chill through her. He had not spared the bandits that night by the wagon. He had killed without hesitation. But these men, these soldiers, he had let them live. A test. She realized it now. Taka had wanted to see what she would do, if she would beg for their help, if she would betray him for a chance at safety. She hadn't. Something unspoken passed between them, a thin thread of understanding. Ellie turned away, looking out over the dark horizon. What happens now? Taka did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost unreadable. "You learn," he said, and she understood. She was not just another settler anymore, not just a lost girl on the frontier. She was something else, something new. The night was alive with whispers, the rustle of wind through the tall grass, the distant howl of a lone wolf, the slow, steady rhythm of hoofbeats pressing into the earth. Ellie crouched low, her fingers gripping the knife Taka had given her. The blade felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it should. She knew this moment had been coming. The soldiers had not given up. They had tracked them, relentless as wolves, their torches burning like fireflies in the dark. And now, there was no more running. Taka stood beside her, his presence solid, unmoving. He had chosen this place, well, a rocky outcrop overlooking the plains, a natural bottleneck where numbers would mean little. They would fight here or die here. Ellie exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Her heart was hammering, but she forced the fear aside. Fear had no place now. The first soldier crested the ridge. Ellie saw the moment he spotted them, his body tense. His hand went for his rifle, but he was too slow. An arrow hissed through the air, finding its mark in his chest. He staggered back, gasping, and crumpled into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the night. Ellie dug behind a boulder as bullets splintered the rock beside her. Taka moved like a shadow, swift and lethal, striking before the soldiers could react. Another man fell, his rifle slipping from his grasp. Ellie's breath came in sharp bursts. She knew she couldn't stay hidden. If she did, Taka would fight alone. She forced herself to move. A soldier lunged toward her, knife flashing. She barely had time to react. Instinct took over. She ducked low, slashing upward with her blade. It found flesh. The man staggered back, clutching his arm, eyes wide with shock. She didn't stop. A second strike, this one deliberate. The man crumpled. Ellie's hands were slick, shaking. But there was no time to think. Another soldier charged. She braced herself. Then a gunshot rang out. The soldier fell before he reached her. Ellie turned in time to see Taka lowering a rifle he must have taken from one of the fallen men. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that told her this fight was almost over. And then silence. The last soldier lay still, his breath fading into the wind. The others were dead. The battle was won. Ellie's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She caught herself, sucking in a breath. It was over. She turned to Taka. He stood motionless, scanning the horizon, as if listening for something she could not hear. "They'll send more," he said finally. Ellie swallowed hard. She knew he was right. The frontier was not kind to those who did not belong. And in the eyes of the world, she was still a settler girl, a lost soul clinging to the edge of a world that would never accept her. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She looked down at her hands, blood-stained, trembling. "I can't go back," she whispered. Taka met her gaze. Then, "Don't." The words were simple, but they held more weight than anything she had ever heard. A choice. She looked out over the wild expanse before them, the endless stretch of land that held no boundaries, no walls. It was untamed, dangerous, but it was free, and so was she. She turned back to Taka, her grip tightening around the knife. "Teach me," she said. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded, and together they disappeared into the wild, leaving only echoes behind.